State Assembly Representative Francesca Hong, who is on the Assembly Education Committee. Fran, good morning. Thank you so much for being here today.
Good morning, Pat. So happy to be here.
I did not check my roster carefully, so I'm asking out of complete ignorance. Are you the ranking Democrat on education this year?
I am the
Okay.
ranking dem this
Okay.
year.
All right. So that's so for all things assembly education. This is our point person who's helping to defend our schools and also put things in to our education system that should be there, like adequate funding, or in this case, healthy school meals for all. And I will say again, and I will say it all the time, this shouldn't be a thing. We shouldn't be having this debate about kids, and not being able to afford being able to have lunch at school. And yet this is where we are. We've talked about this. I think this might be the fourth year the bill's been put up, but give folks a little background on the bill, and then we'll get into how we can get this thing to make some progress.
Thanks so much, Pat. This is one of my favorite bills to introduce and one of my favorite days of the year when we can gather at the Capitol and talk about feeding our kids. This is our third introduction of the Healthy School Meals for All legislation, and it's simple. It's a bill that reimburses schools for feeding kids. It doesn't matter what type of school you go to. It can be a school for the blind, our public schools. And what it ensures is that every kid has access to a healthy, free breakfast and lunch.
That's it. Seriously, that's it. We don't charge kids for riding on the school bus. There's no fare box on the school bus. Why would we have one at the cafeteria? Look, we've heard either for fiscal reasons, or my favorite is when opponents of the bill say, well, we're subsidizing lunch for wealthier families that can afford it. That's a weird time to suddenly be against, subsidies for wealthier families, given how much we send away to, school vouchers, for example. It's a very novel argument. So let's not even debate it. Let me ask instead, and, be as candid as you want to. Do you feel like the bill has been making any progress year by year that this could finally move, or does there seem to be a Republican brick wall to such a basic idea?
We have never had a Republican sign on to our Healthy School Meals for All bill. And we have never gotten a public hearing for this bill. And it's really unfortunate that we are debating hunger and feeding our kids. We should be banning hunger and not banning books. And I do hope that with more Democrats in the state assembly, increasing our numbers and knowing that Republicans have to go back to their communities saying they did something good, that this is what we can agree upon, feeding all of our kids a healthy school meal.
Exactly. I can't imagine a Republican in a swing district being asked point blank, why you don't support this, why you wouldn't even give the bill a public hearing. I mentioned voucher schools a minute ago, and with Governor Evers giving his State of the State address tonight, I note here that Arizona's Governor, Democrat Katie Hobbs, gave her State of the State yesterday and really targeted the explosion of state funds going to voucher schools. We had my colleague Cam Stevenson from the Copper Courier on last week to talk about that as well. This continues to be a very real fiscal concern, never mind the threat to public education, but it's a real fiscal concern that voucher schools could truly blow up the state budget in the not too distant future.
I mean, regardless of your zip code, everyone loves their public schools, and it's a place of community. It's a place of bringing people together, and it's a place where all kids, no matter their background, ability, race, again, or neighborhood, should be able to thrive. And so for our state to be funding two school systems and moving towards privatization of education, which is ultimately what the right is aiming to do, it's a disgrace. And if you look across the country, regardless of political affiliation, folks are fighting for their public schools. Texas to Colorado, Arizona, Indiana. If you look at places who have universal voucher programs, their states are headed towards massive deficits. And it's because funding private schools with public dollars is not feasible. And ultimately, this is about our kids having access to the best education and us as taxpayers having politicians who follow the Constitution. It is every kid's constitutional right to have access to a good public school. And so when we undermine our public schools, when we give public dollars to private entities, we risk harming our kids. And ultimately, this is about our kids.
We are talking to State Representative Francesca Hong from the State Assembly Education Committee. On the Education Committee, it is, I think, a concern of a lot of us that there will be not so much a focus on educational issues as on culture war issues, things that actually target our children by folks who might feel emboldened by remarks made in the new president's inaugural address. Or are those concerns overblown?
No, they are not. And let me be crystal clear. For our vulnerable students, our students who are queer, our kids of color, all students who don't have access to a high quality public education, Democrats are here to fight for each and every one of you. We should not be using kids as political footballs. They should never be a political target. And for Republicans to very intentionally go after queer or trans kids, it's incredibly disheartening and it's wrong. And it's cowardly, to be honest, because instead of debating the issues, we are distracting the public by weaponizing kids, trans kids who just want to be kids, who just want to be able to navigate this incredibly difficult world for them right now with ease. And every kid should be able to be their most authentic selves and to thrive. And it's an absolute disgrace that Republicans insist on putting our kids in danger as opposed to working on policies that will help cut costs for families, like healthy school meals for all.
Not to mention the kids who, frankly, are still wrestling with sexual identity and gender identity. It is a mental health issue that these are kids who need support, they need resources, they need guidance, rather than being shunned, banned, shamed, marginalized, whatever the case may be. And we really appreciate having you on the Assembly Education Committee to help stick up for that very vulnerable population. I guess I could mention in passing that there is still the unfunded literacy mandate. That's more of a joint finance committee thing where they're sitting on money that has been approved for literacy programs, but they continue sitting on it, wanting to micromanage, the way that school districts spend the money. This is from the last budget. We're dealing with the new budget, and yet I sense, Representative Hong, that this standoff may go on for a bit yet.
It's getting tied up in the courts, which is not surprising that when Republicans don't get their way, they try to litigate their way out of it and use taxpayer dollars to fund their legal representation. This bill was already controversial, and I think it's incredibly unfortunate that when our educators and our administrators are now forced to grapple with implementing these new standards, that we are here still debating whether or not to fund it and give folks the resources to be able to implement this new literacy bill and be able to help and support our kids. And so once again, Republicans are weaponizing and withholding good things from our communities. And I really do hope that we can move past and that committee releases these funds so that our educators and our administrators are able to follow the law.
Again, it's in the category of this shouldn't be a thing. This money was approved. It should be released. Here's another in that category, and stepping away from education for a moment, under the category of this shouldn't be a thing, that when it comes to expanding Medicaid coverage for new moms, that the federal government does have financial incentives to extend that coverage from, I think it's 60 days right now, to 12 months postpartum, because it's such a health hazardous time for women. And I think 48 states have done this, except Wisconsin and Arkansas. And yet, Fran, this is one of the most bipartisan ideas that's out there. One man stood in the way last session, and that same man is proudly saying he's going to stand in the way this session. Can you kind of fill in the background on expanding Medicaid coverage for new moms?
Robin Vos is always more interested in protecting his power than doing good for the people of Wisconsin. And for Robin Vos to be the lone obstacle on the most bipartisan bill and helping our new mothers ensure that they have the rest and the autonomy to be able to take care of themselves and their babies, and to get in the way of that, when we know that the majority of Wisconsinites want this, the majority of legislators want this, and And yet Robin Vos is choosing to exert his power and try to leverage and again weaponize new moms and withhold funding and withhold the ability for us to pass this bill. And it's unfortunate, but again, not surprising because this is who Vos is.
He wants us to basically fall into a rhetorical trap here where he lists all Medicaid as welfare. And does not want any of it. He thinks it's government spending on welfare, and he lumps that into that category. And he wants to have a debate on Medicaid as welfare. I'm pretty sure that there are plenty of Republicans on the other side of the aisle from you there in the assembly who don't want to have that discussion, to bring it right down to the level of individual health for the women in their district, the women in their families.
Our families are struggling all across Wisconsin, and everyone just wants to be able to take care of themselves and their loved ones and ensure that they have access to economic security. And Robin Vos, once again, is more concerned about welfare for the rich and the powerful few, as opposed to making sure that our families have, again, an ability to take care of themselves. And for new mothers who already have gone through the traumatic experience of birth, not to have access to care, it's an absolute abomination. And once again, Republicans would rather prioritize making sure that the rich get tax cuts. They would prioritize making sure that wealthier families or families who already have access to great public schools have public dollars to send their kids to private schools. Again, welfare for the rich is not a new thing for Republicans, and they would rather tell you that folks who are struggling because of our inequitable wealth systems and the fact that wealth disparities have been growing for the last 20 years in this country, this is who they are. They would rather protect the wealthy and privileged few and themselves than actually do good for the families in Wisconsin.
And let me ask about the Attorney General, Josh Kaul, and Governor Evers joining a lawsuit that says that what President Trump wants to do with birthright citizenship, trying to strike it down, is an unconstitutional power grab. But between attacking birthright citizenship and threatening mass deportations, what is the impact of that on Wisconsin families, the Wisconsin economy, and your own concerns about these kinds of policies?
Communities should not have to live in fear. I mean, when you have folks who are already struggling to take care of themselves and their families, and then you add this other layer of the fact that you may be taken away from your family, it's unconscionable. And I think that Republicans who would rather, force families to think about potentially being ripped apart as opposed to being able to thrive in their communities. We have immigrant families and immigrants who contribute greatly to every sector of this country, whether it's dairy farmers, whether it's folks who are in food packaging, the people who are washing our dishes in our restaurants. The dishwasher, by the way, is the most important person in a restaurant. It's incredibly disheartening and it's wrong. And so for Governor Evers and Attorney General Kaul to make sure that they state and are working to protect immigrants and folks who are undocumented in this country gives us a sense of assurance that we have people fighting for them. And I think that it's important that we recognize that immigrants and undocumented folks pay taxes. They contribute to, again, every sector of this economy. And we are going to see costs rising. We are going to see quality of life become more detrimental for all families when we attack our undocumented and immigrant communities.
Representative Francesca Hong from Madison. Fran, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it, and we'll see you tonight for the State of the State.
Always happy to be here. Thanks, Pat.